Good morning. I see you all filing in for our second session of the day. Good to see you all. Welcome back, and thank you for continuing to join us in Cherry Bekaert's 2023 Government and Public Sector Virtual Conference. Those of you that did not attend yesterday, my name is Danny Martinez, and I lead Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector Accounting Advisory Group. Really appreciate the strong attendance across both days. I really hope a lot of you all were able to catch the first session today. It's just unbelievably informative information from Adam of Gov Navigators. You know, like when I present, I think I know the material well, and then I hear someone like Adam speak on the topic that he's the expert in, just blows me away. Make sure you check out their podcast. Really great, really entertaining, 20-minute listen a week. I was also glad you could hear from Christian this morning, about our campaign around trusting government, and definitely more to come on that. We have great speakers continuing the next 3 sessions. Keep in mind you get 1 hour of CPE per each session. So before we get started, just go over the housekeeping items again. To receive CPE credit, you must answer at least 3 polling questions and attend for the full 50 minutes. CPE certificates will be issued via email within 10 days. If you have not received yours after 10 days, please contact cbhlearning@cbh.com. A recorded version of this webinar, along with the slides, will be available in about 1 week and will be sent via email and posted to our website. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A window. So you'll see you have a chat window and a Q&A window. Our speakers will be monitoring the Q&A window, and they will either answer during the presentation or we will get back to you directly after the presentation. Please make sure that you complete the short survey. It will be posted at the conclusion of the webinar. And with that, I would like to introduce our speakers today. Dan Gogarty, the Audit Director with Cherry Bekaert, and Shuo Zhang, our Cherry Bekaert Advisory Manager that focuses especially on grants management. So Shuo, please take it away.
All right, so everyone, welcome to our session today. We'll give you a couple of minutes here to start your second coffee of the morning, and then we'll go right in. And our colleague Dan will be taking over for the second part of the section. All right, here's our first polling question right up. You will have to actually click a answer on the screen to be, to get your answer counted for your CPE credit. So the first question is, what is your primary purpose for attending today's webinar? First answer will be, well, we have federal grants funding. Second one is, well, we're looking to get into the federal funding. Third one, well, I need some CPE credit for the year. And the last one is, well, I will tell you in the chat.
And for everyone who opts for that last selection, other sharing in the chat, make sure you also tick that box in the poll and then go ahead and give us your response in the chat. So thank you.
All right. On the screen, you'll be able to see the answer today. I'm glad to see that at least half of you have grant funding. Congratulations. And great, you're also here for CPE credit. All right, let's dive right in. So this is the agenda for the day. First, we'll talk about why do you need a pre-award grant readiness assessment if you are operating on some federal funding or you are thinking about it. The second one is, well, we'll be introducing you 3 pillars of building a sound grant management structure. And then we'll go to the audit side. We'll look at the grant audit, audit findings, and what you need to get ready for your 2023 compliance supplement. First, let's start with why is it important for us to be government grant ready in the first place? I always want to draw your attention to the middle one first, high expectations. Hopefully you're enjoying the little icon we picked. It feels like there's so many compliance requirements you have to follow. Sometimes it feels like the expectation is like reaching up to the stars. Especially when you receive government funding, they are technically, tax dollars. So it comes under enormous public pressure of transparency. The first one on the left shows that when you receive government funding, it usually has some very high impact if non-compliance were to be discovered. Sometimes we'll see that, okay, you have to return funding to your donor. You'll have audit findings on your audit report. Sometimes your donor will give your peers an annual report requirement, but you may have to give them report on monthly basis. So all those says, the government grant usually have a really high impact in your operation. On the right-hand side, it shows sometimes there's limited resources for you to actually deal with all the tight compliance requirement. You may have, you may not have like enough personnel. You may not have enough time to ramp up your government grant quickly. There are so many challenges. That being said, these are the typical challenges we have seen with the government grantee. First one is definitely experience. Some of you might be new to the grant space and you're not super familiar how exactly grant works. The second one is time. Sometimes you only have a 3 grant year and you're required to start everything right away, let's say 2 months into your grant. So you're kind of rushed into getting everything ready for your grant. Sometimes we see that you don't necessarily have the best digital platform for you to keep all the data visible for all your staff, therefore managing things efficiently. Sometimes when you're just going into the grants world, you may notice some of the compliance requirements are not exactly the same as the accounting standard you'll be following. So you may have to build a brand new process for your grant management. The staffing challenge is something we often see, as we previously mentioned, and the knowledge gap the knowledge may not just be there, and you definitely need a lot of study hours to get yourself familiar with all the grant compliance requirement. So here comes our second poll question. How often do you conduct grant management related trainings for your staff? You might conduct routine trainings. You may do it annually after the audit is finished and look at what the auditor is discussing with your management. You may take a look whenever you get a new grant. You may not recall when was the last time you got a grant training. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to answer this question there. Awesome, we're getting things in. So don't worry at all, there's no right or wrong answer here. All right, so the answer of the poll question number 2 is on the screen right now. 40% of you do not recall what is the last time you got a grant training. And I'm so glad to see that at least 28% of you are receiving routine trainings. That is awesome. All right. So let's talk about the 3 pillars of a sound grant management. Well, what are things you need exactly to ensure that, okay, I'm ready. I'm totally ready for a government grant. To sum it up, these are the three pillars that you need to have a good structure. First, you definitely need your policy and procedures to be written down. Even if you have really experienced staff, you know, you will have staff coming and going into the grants world all the time. You definitely want to have things written for them to follow. The second one is, well, you may have a good fiscal years based accounting system. However, you may notice that the grants management is not exactly the same as accounting standard. First, you follow your grant year, not your fiscal year. And you may have more people involved into your whole grant management process on top of your finance staff. So you definitely want a good system. The third one is, well, you want some staff that's experienced with grant. They can tell what are the typical compliance requirements, they can provide training for your staff, and they can do compliance review when the expenditures coming in. So let's go deep dive into each of these pillars. First, why do we even need something written? We're doing just fine. Well, first, you have to stay in compliance with at least the federal and state award requirement when you're receiving a federal or state grant. Here's an example for you. Actually, it's written in uniform guidance that the financial management system of each non-federal entity, which is all of us here, must provide for the following: written procedure for determination of allowability of cost in accordance with subpart E. So you may notice it says must. Usually that is the word when you're reading through uniform guidance to tell you if this is something we're recommending for you to have or you don't have a choice. So this is one of the cases that you don't have a choice. Having a written policy is actually mandatory. Well, having a written policy also is good for you to keeping everything consistent, right? You're always going to incur some of the expenses that's operation in nature or administrative in nature. It depends on who's incurring them, how you look at things. Sometimes it may look indirect cost, or sometimes it may look like direct cost. However, the government does require you to follow something that's consistent. So having something written every time when you are incurring such expense, you can always refer to the policy. Well, having a written policy also is really helpful for your staff. For some of our staff, managing grant financially may not be their day-to-day life. So every time they have something coming up, have a place to go and have something to read is extremely helpful. These are the typical policies as we recommend you have as a starting point. Note, these are the basic things you definitely need to have to start building a good policy system. Some of you may choose to have everything in the same place. Some of you may choose to have different sections and in different locations. However, you definitely need to have all of these as a starting point. We understand some of our audience today, you might have a very specialized field, right? You may come from a hospital, a clinic, you may do infrastructures, you may do constructions. So you have a very specialized field related to what you do. However, regardless what field you are actually in, these are all the policies you need to have regardless what field you're in. So let's pick a couple of them just to have a look, right? What's actually in it and why do you need it? These are the three we definitely recommend you have as a starting point. The first one is procurement policy. do you have a threshold of different type of procurement policy? When do you require sealed bid? What expenditure do you consider micro purchase and you don't need 3 quotes? All of these need to be written down and published in your internal library, and you need to educate your staff at least on an annual basis. What indirect cost rate you choose to use when you're applying for a grant? Are you going to apply for a 9 grant? Are you going to just take that 10% the federal government offer you as no question asked percentage? Or do you want to do something in the middle, but you do have to negotiate with your donor on grant basis? What is your plan? For the travel policy, well, do you pay fixed per diem? Do you reimburse the actual cost? Do you allow people to take certain airlines, but not the other? Do you reimburse their breakfast, and under what circumstances do you reimburse their breakfast? All these questions, you actually need to have them written down and have your staff educated. Do you have subrecipient? Do you intend to have subrecipient? How do you determine who is a subrecipient or who is a contractor, because they come with different compliance requirements? Do you want to actually request every single receipts from your subrecipients, or do you just check them on quarterly basis? What is your time and effort policy? How do people charge their time to the grant? Who's going to reviewing them and who's going to approve them? What is your AP policy? What is allowed turnaround time if you were to charge a grant expense? At what point do you tell people, guess what? It's too late and we have to pay out of the pocket? All these seems to be a policy in general, but they actually will affect your daily lives once you start an actual grant. So let's talk about what is the financial system with grant management capacity. I use Peachtree. I have a good Microsoft Dynamics. I have, everything I need to manage my day-to-day financial transactions. Why do I need something extra? Well, the first one is something you probably have been hearing over and over again by your donor, by your auditors, and probably by your management as well, right? You cannot commingle funds when receiving grants. It is really the government's attention sometimes to make sure that the cash they are giving you are separately counted and the expense you're incurring are separately counted compared to all your other expenses. So please make sure your system is able to host each grant separately. Well, if we all have the time when, oh my God, I have to send in a 3-page reimbursement, right, to get things charged to a grant. Well, if you're providing your staff with something that's really high tech and save their time, well, they are more likely to do it on a timely basis. If you do have an efficient grant management system, you'll be able to make your project manager really happy. They'll be able to get your timely budget versus actual report. They can look at them on real-time basis. They can do their planning. They can do their planning of hiring well ahead of time. Your donor will be happy too, because they can request an accurate progress report at any given moment. So sometimes your expense may not be as straightforward as they seem. You incur expense and then you realize, well, I actually need to allocate across different grants. Now Excel is great, but sometimes if you have a good system, you'll be able to load 1,000 number of transactions and do one click. It's all correctly allocated versus your finance manager will have to spend like at least 5 hours plotting through the Excels. So having a system is definitely beneficial for you. So the last pillar is, well, you definitely need experienced grant management staff. I'm sure you all have amazingly dedicated finance staff with your organization. However, why do I need someone with that grant management knowledge to be specific? Well, to start with, just because the grants are slightly different from your day-to-day accounting work, your grant management staff can foresee what might happen ahead of time, even before your budget is approved, before you get a grant agreement. They may be able to tell, okay, I can foresee we definitely will have to incur a certain type of cost. Let's write them into the budget and get approved. Or we can foresee we need to go through all this procurement process. You know what? Before we actually get our grant, let's plan on it. Let's work with our construction team. Let's form a committee. Let's get everything ready. So as soon as we get a grant agreement, we start right away. Your grant management staff will be able to minimize the allowable cost. Before you actually start activity, they already have that in mind. Okay, the activity obviously is allowable and what we're supposed to do. However, if you have to collect certain type of documentations to make your actual expenditure allowable, what do we need to do? Do I produce a ledger ahead of time so people can follow the examples when they are getting reimbursed or they are getting their incentive cards? Things like that, your manager will have to plan for you ahead of time, and to make sure that all the costs end up to be allowable. Your experienced managed staff can also provide some trainings from time to time. You will have staff that may just work on this particular grant, and then on top of that, they really don't go into the grants world on day-to-day basis. For that reason, they should be able to come to this grant management staff and ask for help. And your grant management staff should be able to provide routine trainings for everyone who could even remotely work on a grant. These are some more detailed activities when you're hiring a grant manager. You should keep in mind, maybe include some of them in their job description. Maybe make sure that your existing staff are doing some of this work. They should be able to do risk and compliance diagnostics. They're like, okay, what might go wrong, right? Our goal is, at the end of the day, nothing should go wrong, but you know what? Let's look at what might go wrong and prevent it ahead of time. They should be able to implement the whole grant, and they should be able to be the person reviewing all the vouchers and make sure, as soon as something goes through me, it's allowable and there's zero chance of audit finding. And they should be able to work with your staff to get ready for the audit. All right, so I see some questions have been asked here. So here's a question about, well, in the slide, it says uniform guidance indicates written procedures, not policy. Does that change anything? Well, actually, not necessarily. You definitely want your policies, and your policies are generally on a higher scope, and procedures is something related to your day-to-day work. In order to have a policy, let's say we need segregation of duties. So the policy is to have a segregated duty. However, exactly how that happens, you definitely want to outline that in the procedure. Another question here is, Do the federal funds have to be segregated by activities or by fund? Can non-allowable charges be charged to one account within the same fund used for grant revenue? So the question is, how extensive should we keep things segregated? So usually what we have seen is when you have one funding source, you definitely need to segregate all the expenses happen under this funding source. Exactly how detailed the activity needs to be segregated depends on your specific grant award. But definitely non-allowable charges cannot be charged or included in any of your funding pot in your financial system. That's for sure. Thank you so much for the question. All right. So we are at our question number 3. Now, since we talked about the 3 pillars, which pillar do you think is the most challenging for you right now? So if your answer is unsure, feel free to click unsure. Make sure you click unsure, and then feel free to put into the chat. All right, so the result is currently on the screen. We kind of have a rather even result here, but most of you have expressed that having an experienced grant manager has been a challenge. That's actually fairly consistent with what we have seen in the past year. We've been doing similar polls in different webinars, and number 3 has always been the biggest challenge. And we absolutely feel your pain. All right, so before we jump into our audit session, we just want to reiterate that staying in low risk category is really, really important for you. If you somehow got categorized as a medium or a high risk grantee, the government usually will put additional compliance requirement into your agreement. For example, you'll be able to only ask for reimbursement rather to receive cash advance. Sometimes they will ask for more reports than your peers. So definitely, please make sure you always stay in the low risk category. And you want to, if you are in that low risk category, you really show strong internal control. And as you may have remembered that every time you apply for a grant, you always have to answer a questionnaire. And then you are actually being evaluated, depends on the answer of your questionnaire. And if you have a strong internal control, at least on that part, you are scored higher than your peers. And the last question is always, okay, you definitely do not want to be on the front page of Washington Post. Although these days, we don't know how many people still read Washington Post. Regardless, you definitely do not want to be on the front page because it's gonna cause you reputational and financial damages. So thank you so much for liking my joke. I live 1 block from Washington Post, so I feel like, I have the right to joke about them. All right, so next we will jump into our audit section, and then the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Shu. How's everyone doing today? So I'm gonna now kind of take off that hat from management. Okay, you got the grant, you're applying for a grant, you're working on your grant management. Now you got into the audit. Now put that auditor lens on, and what are we all looking for when we come out there and audit your grants? And so mostly I'm going to try to update you on changes on the 2023 supplement, but I'm also going to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit about single audits in general as well. So first, I just thought these were some informative statistics out there that the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants had done back when a lot of the COVID funding started popping up. They estimate that there's about 34,000 to 38,000 single audits that are required in a typical year pre-COVID. And then they further found that with the COVID funding, that they estimated there's about 10 to 20,000 of additional single audits that are now annually required due to COVID funding. So this means there's a lot of entities out there that may not have been subject to single audit procedures because their grants were not reaching that level, or maybe they didn't receive any grants at all, that are now receiving grants and now requiring single audits. And so that's why, again, that first part there on the grant management is so important, especially for those entities that have not seen this that often, or maybe they have a single audit, but they only have 1 or 2 grants that they usually manage, and now they're managing 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 grants. And then also just pointing out here that there is certain COVID funding that now even for-profit recipients do have to have a single audit as well for certain funding, such as the provider relief funding. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is just the applicability of the supplement itself. So the OMB compliance supplement is effective for all audits of fiscal years beginning after June 30th, 2022. So for a lot of our clients in our firm, that has to do with our June 30, 2023 audits, and then also our September 30th, 2023 audits, and anything in between there and before and after. And so this supersedes the previous year compliance supplement, and it was dated May. The previous one was dated in May of 2022, and the new one has been released in May of 2023. Years ago, the supplements weren't being released until August, and then with the COVID years, it sometimes went as far as September or December. So they've gotten a lot better over the last 2 years in getting us the supplements early, because when we're trying to do our planning work and trying to get out there and do some work ahead of time, we're using old supplements, and then we have to kind of look at the new supplement when it comes out. In this case, we usually have the new supplement in time the last 2 years. And one thing also I just wanted to point out too is that I'm going to go over the 12 compliance requirements in a later slide for 2 examples. And of those 12 compliance requirements, we really only are limited to testing 6. And there's one exception, and that's the research and development cluster, in which they have identified 7, and that's been allowed by the Office of Management Budget. But in most cases, while there's 12 requirements, all or some may apply to you, but we are only tasked with auditing 6 of those 12 requirements. So this is the first slide I want to spend a little bit of time on, which is, while it's the May 2023 supplement, it's new, and we're going to go over a lot of new stuff in the next couple of slides. This slide is more of kind of like that backbone of what is the OMB compliance supplement. And this is the best way I can describe it to you all, is a cheat sheet for you all at the state and local level of what we are looking at for our audit. Within this document is everything that includes all our objectives of the audit, includes suggested procedures, includes information on internal controls. It includes everything in there that we may ask anyone from your grant team when we come in to perform our single audit. So just the first one here, background, purpose, applicability, that's just more of a general, doesn't change year to year, just kind of gives you an insight into what the Uniform Grant Guidance Audit is and why it's required. Part 2 is the matrix. I'm going to go over one of these matrix later. These matrix are now included in every program individually, but if you wanted to look at just the matrix by itself, you can look at part 2, and this tells us what to test. This tells us, of those 12 requirements, which 6 are we going to test. Part 3 is an overall compliance requirements. So this is the what I like to refer to it as kind of like the backbone or the background of what our tests are going to be, rather than saying what allowable cost is every single time for every single individual program. They have one place where they're saying a general statement of what allowable cost is. general statement what cash management means, all those kind of things. And then you have part 4 that goes into the individual program requirements of specific programs. And so in part 4, they might not, for equipment, for example, the matrix might say we need to test equipment, but in the part 4 for a particular program, they might not have anything listed for our testing for equipment. In that case, we would be looking back at part 3. And even if they have something listed, we always have to be looking back at part 3. So you really, when we're looking at it from an audit perspective, we are looking at that part 3 and part 4. Part 5 goes over some cluster of programs and mostly deals with the student financial aid cluster and the testing surrounding that. Part 6 is a really important one I want to point out here, is because when we come into audit, you might always hear us saying, well, what was the internal control? How do you, who, I understand this person prepared it. I understand they're in this job for a number of years. They're really knowledgeable about the program, but then who separately looked at this and made sure it was in compliance with the program? And so this section goes over common internal controls that you might find for every compliance requirement. It's not obviously a complete comprehensive list of every single thing, but it does give a good baseline and some good examples that anyone, any entity that's getting audited out there, state, local, should look at that if they're struggling to find, okay, well, how do I put in a control in place over cash management, or how do I put a control in place over program income? You might want to look there and see what examples they have that might fit your organization. Part 7 is the guidance on audit programs that are not in the supplement, which basically just says, if there is not a specific program listed in part 4 for the program we're testing, then you would go to part 3 and test that. And then the pick 6 does not apply. You have to test everything that we as auditors deem to be direct and material to the program. So, and then on the high risk program update here, this is part of the appendices, which is that last part on the last slide. And so in the past, the high risk programs used to be just the Medicaid cluster, which was a Health and Human Service Department of Health and Human Service grant. Since the COVID funding got released, this has been ever-changing chart for the last couple of years. And so you can see here at the top there, we got about 5 programs that continue to be on the list as high-risk programs, mostly, again, Medicaid cluster and ARP or coronavirus CARES Act money that continues to be considered to be high risk, which means from an auditor perspective, we need to audit that program every year that it reaches, after it reaches a certain threshold. And so in the past, we used to be able to we could just normally with programs, we can audit once every 3 years. This, we have to audit it every year that it's over our threshold to be audited. A couple programs all added there. I am going to go over the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund in a little bit, but these are just a few of those programs, 4 programs that have been added. And then we had 3 programs that were removed: Airport Improvement, Federal Transit Cluster, and then the National Railroad Passenger Corporation grants. And go on the next slide here, another update in the 2023 supplement has to do with the highway planning construction cluster decoupling. So there was a cluster known as a highway planning. And in that highway planning grant, they had 4 different assistance listing numbers that were grouped together, and we'd audited as one program. Now it has been broken out into each 4 separate individual programs. And so these programs will now be audited separately versus together. And then on this slide here, I have a listing of 11 new programs overall that have been have new compliance supplements. So there might be more new programs out there right now, but these are the only ones that they made specific compliance supplements for. So we have 1 program from the Department of Interior. We have a number here, 5 here from the Department of Transportation, and we got 5 from the U.S. Department of Treasury, which continues to see additional programs every year, especially with the COVID money. If you looked at the U.S. Department of Treasury previous to this, I think they only had 1 or 2 programs that they administered. So they went from only, as a department, only administering 1 or 2 smaller programs to now audit, having a range of programs with all the COVID dollars that have been received. This slide I just want to talk about is the changes to the submission process. So if you're familiar with the submission process, once the audit's complete, once the single audit's complete, the Federal Audit Clearinghouse will no longer be accepting submissions as of September 30th, 2023. So that was the previous vendor that was used by the federal government to submit these audits, and that the submission process was to submit in a very unique standard way the audit results, so that the federal governments could actually slice and dice the data and see who's getting what and how much money everyone is getting, and what programs were tested and when, and if there were findings, how many findings and what kind of findings do they have. So this is just really a tool for the federal government to use to look at the data of single audits. All 2023 submissions, so anyone that has a year end ending with 2023 has to wait until the new system is up and running. You cannot submit into the old system any 2023 audits. And so that new system will go into effect in October. And so right when this system is down, is taken down, and anything that is in draft format in any way will not be able to be finished. So it has to be submitted and accepted by the FAC prior to that September 30th or on September 30th, 2023. Anything in flux will then have to be put into the new system. And then one other important thing here is, with a new system, there could be bugs, there could be issues. So they foresaw that and said, we're going to do away with this 30-day requirement. As you may be aware, to be a low-risk auditee, you must file within 30 days of receiving your audit report. And so they did away with that requirement for any year end starting from January 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2023. So if you don't get it within 30 days and you have a year end of one of those in that range, you can still be considered a low risk auditee if you meet all the other criteria. After September 30th, any year ends after, you are going to have to abide by that 30-day requirement. So next couple of slides, I want to talk about the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. I mean, it's a huge undertaking. I'm not going to be talking about all as it relates to it. I'm just really want to brush the surface and just kind of explain the impact as it relates to the compliance requirements. So the law, as you know from other presentations that we've had here, authorized $1.2 trillion for transportation, with a little under half of that going towards new investments and programs that didn't exist previous to the act being initiated. And this funding is being spread across current and new programs. So if you think about it, like the ARPA funding for state and local governments, the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, that is its own program. It has one compliance supplement that we're testing. Here, this is all funding that is being infused into existing programs. Multiple existing transportation programs, for instance, is a big part of this, but the other programs as well. And so it's not just one program that we're going to test as an IIJA program. It's all programs are going to be subject to this if they have IIJA funding linked to it. Next thing here is the Build America, Buy America Act, which is part of the IIJA. And so it was enacted at the same time there, and it relates to all infrastructure project awards that are initiated by May 14, 2022 and thereafter. And it is applicable to all federal financial assistance, so it isn't just IIJA. It is any federal financial assistance that has to do with infrastructure building that was initiated after that date is going to have to abide by the Buy American Act. And then this next slide here just talks about some of the requirements. So this is all, again, dealing with infrastructure, but it talks about the iron, steel, manufactured products, construction materials that use federal funding and infrastructure. This is going to abide by manufactured products, it's going to abide by, and then also just all construction materials that are manufactured in the United States. And the next slide we have here, it talks, I reference a memo that came out from the OMB that talks about the term infrastructure and what it defines here. I won't read through here, but you can see here, this is a very succinct, all the different things that they consider to be included in that infrastructure definition, which you then would have to abide by, the Buy America Act. And I'm sorry, go back one slide. I forgot the last one there was the Buy America preference only applies to articles, materials, and supplies that are consumed in, incorporated in, or affixed to the infrastructure project. So I kind of equate this to like if the construction companies has a drill that they're using, and that's not really consumed in the actual, but the nail is consumed in, but the drill is not incorporated or affixed to. So it goes down to the level of actually in the project itself. So the first one, I have two programs here that I wanted to discuss with you all. And the first one is that new program, the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. It is been identified as a high-risk program in the 2023 compliance supplement. And then for the capital projects to be eligible, it has to meet one of these three requirements, which is investing in assets designed directly enable work, education, health monitoring, something that was affected by the COVID-19 public health emergency that needed, that was a critical need and needed help, or capital projects that address a critical need of the community to be served by it. But there were three projects that are considered to be presumed to be eligible projects that meet those three criteria. And so the three projects that are presumed in the funding agreement is broadband infrastructure projects, digital connectivity technology projects, and then multi-purpose community facility projects. And then we have here the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. Again, I just wanted to give a little bit of context to some of that funding in three of the states that we have our largest presence in right now, which is Virginia being first one here. The state had decided that $219 million was going to be allocated to CPF funding. I'm sorry, of the CPF funding, $219 million was allocated to broadband projects. North Carolina has allocated 65% to broadband, which is about $177 million. They have not allocated the other 35% as of when I created this slide. Florida did 68%, which is $247 million to broadband, but they also did 86.9 million to multipurpose communities. And that was 24% of their allocation. So they still have 8% as well to allocate to different projects. So here is an example of the matrix that I spoke about earlier. So we have the Department of Treasury here. This is the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. I will mention here, I'm not seeing this funding coming through to our local governments yet, on the governments that I serve. This is mostly, I think, happening at the state level right now, but I don't know if there is going to be some pass through as the projects start to wind up a little more, but this is new funding. So what I have here in the green bar is all the compliance requirements, so all 12 of our compliance requirements. What I want to make sure I'm clear in here is, regardless if there's a yes or a no, if you have, for instance, in this case, if you have a matching requirement that you need to match federal funds at 50% or 10% or whatever the percentage is, even though it says a no here, that we don't have to audit that, you would still need to abide by your grant agreement. So do not take this as a means to say, oh, these are the things we need to, as the grantor or the grantee, abide by, and what things we can just let go and not worry about. This is purely from an audit standpoint. this is what we're going to be looking at for 2023. Now in 2024, they could change it up and tell us different things that they want us to be looking at. But you need to, as an organization, be abiding by any and all grant requirements in your grant agreement. So as you can see here, I have it. Oh, go back up. So as I see here, you see in the red, I've highlighted the yeses. So in this case, if you counted all the reds and the yeses, you get 7. And you say, well, didn't you tell me there was a pick 6? One caveat to the pick 6 is activities allowed and allowable costs are considered 1 for the pick 6 determination. And so what we have here is 7 when you consider those as 1. So in this case, we as auditors would be looking to make sure, did you spend the money appropriately based on the requirements of the grant and what they're required and allowing you to spend it on? Cash management, if it's reimbursement basis, making sure that you've incurred the cost before you're requesting reimbursement for it. Period of performance, dealing with making sure you incur the cost within the period that's allowable under the grant. It wasn't before, it wasn't after. Sometimes you have ones that are before and the grants specifically say they allow for that. But otherwise, if they don't, it should be within the period of performance noted. Procurement, suspension, debarment, those are the things we're going to be looking at. Make sure you put out these projects, especially a lot of these projects are big construction projects. Make sure you're following the uniform grant guidance procurement policies. Make sure you're spending the money the right way. And suspension, debarment, make sure you're ensuring that the person that you're working with isn't suspended or debarred. This is also probably where we'll be testing that steel. Make sure the Buy America, Build America is being spent properly. And then you got reporting here, any reporting requirements, and subrecipient monitoring, which I'll go over that in a little bit with the other funding source. So the last one I have here to go over is the coronavirus state local fiscal recovery funds that we've seen that at the state and local levels. This is, again, a high-risk program for the 2023 compliance supplement. I would venture to say that they're probably going to have this for the next couple of years as the program winds down, as continue to be high risk and wanting us to test this on a year-to-year basis. And as you probably know already, but I'm just I'll just refresh everyone's memories here is if you receive this funding, this is either to replace lost public sector revenue you can use it for, respond to the negative impacts of the pandemic, providing premium pay, or invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So you see a theme here. The other funding, they really presume that you can use that for broadband infrastructure. You could use that here as well. So definitely is a key in those two funding sources. Okay, we got polling for question, the fourth polling question here. So are you applying for Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act or Inflation Reduction Act grant funding? And so the first response here would be yes, we have applied for the IIJA grants. Second is yes, we have applied for the IRA grants. Third is being yes, we have applied for both. And the last one here is we haven't applied yet or may not be applying for either. So as we'll just wait a few more minutes a few more seconds to get everyone's response in there. If you don't see the poll 4 is up and it's about your Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act funding, and if you are expecting to receive that funding or not. And again, the poll is closed here. And so most have actually answered that we haven't applied yet or may not be applying. So overwhelmingly 72% are not right now in the running for the IIJA or IRA funding. There are 15% that have applied for both, and then a couple that have applied just for the individual grants themselves. Okay, we can close that down. And then, oops, sorry, one more slide back. The last slide I have here, again, this is just that matrix. In green, everything applies to you. You need to abide by it. In red, those are the things the auditors are going to apply to. And the only thing I wanted to point out different here, which we did have a question on this, and I feel like this is the question I get the most on most of my clients, is subrecipient monitoring. really, it's a key aspect there of really understanding your grants with others, and making sure that they are either a subrecipient or a contractor. And kind of thrown in there now as well, I mean, it's always kind of been there, but more so now than ever, is grant beneficiary. So is it neither a subrecipient or a contractor? And really, it's just a grant beneficiary, and they're not subject to the uniform grant guidance. They are just the ultimate grant beneficiary, benefiting from the grant funds. In which case I've seen this with not-for-profits receiving money to help provide to just do their business and operate, because there was a loss of funding due to the COVID pandemic. And so they were given money to help just fund their operations as a whole. And there wasn't a specific project or a specific thing that they needed to abide by that related to the compliance supplement. So it's a tricky situation. It's not a one size fits all, but you really need to be cognizant of, is it a subrecipient, is it a contractor, or is it a grant beneficiary? Because if it's a subrecipient, there is going to be an excessive amount of work that goes into that in terms of making sure you have the right agreement, you have proper monitoring, ongoing monitoring every year, and that you close out the process correctly as well. So with that, I think that's going to be it. So I appreciate everyone's time here and joining us today, and I'll let Danny finish this up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Definitely exciting times in the grant world. You know, just with Adam's presentation before about the generational influx of money. Not uncommon to see someone that previously received under 750 in federal awards now receiving 5 or 10 million, and the different types of awards. So really timely. Thank you all. That was a great presentation. I do want to make one announcement really quickly. So we're noticing that some of you all are sharing your Zoom link to the presentation with each other. The way that we give CPE is that we see who's clicked on the specific link, and sometimes it'll even lock you out from being able to attend yourself. So please do not forward the link to the Zoom webinar. If you have someone that needs to attend or is wanting to attend one of those last 2 sessions, in the chat we just shared the virtual conference link, or if you just go to our website, Cherry Bekaert Virtual Conference, you can sign on directly from there, just so we make sure that each of you get the CPE that you all have earned. So that concludes our second topic of this morning. Our next webinar, Cybersecurity and Education, Regulations, Incidents, and Practical Considerations, will begin in about 12 minutes, and we really hope to see you there. Thank you all.